there's not a straight set of guidelines that says this is what is okay, this is what's acceptable. And if we had that, it would revolutionize media.
Rachel, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. And as I was just saying, I am really looking forward to this conversation. I feel like there's going to be a lot of things that you know that not everybody else does, and people probably should know. And I'm really looking forward to it. So yeah, it's going to be good.
I'm not going to promise anything, but because that's a tall order, but okay.
No, it is absolutely not. I have read your work. I know what you do. I feel like a lot of people are going to appreciate this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to delving a bit deeper.
Okay. Thank you.
So the first question that I ask absolutely everybody on this podcast is, how do you refer to your disability?
So I mean, I've got about 27 disabilities, to be honest with you. That's not accurate. I've not got 27, but I have got over 10. So it's just easier for me to say I'm disabled. So I've got neurodivergent disabilities, I've got mental disabilities, I've got physical disabilities. It's just easier to say disabled.
It is though, and I really like that as well, because I always I bang the drum about how disability, or saying, disabled disability, is actually very much an umbrella term. It's not a direct, and it's not a pinpoint. It's something that overviews a lot of different things. And actually the way that we refer to ourselves, and I was having this conversation with a friend, is that if you refer to yourself as disabled, that in itself is a full sentence. Like, you don't need to delve any deeper into that if you don't want to.
Well, that's it. Like, so much of the area where I work, people expect, they're always expecting full explanations, and they're always expecting more details, and more often than not, it's quite personal things about people's diagnoses and traumatic details about people's life. And it's like, I'm disabled, I've got a disability, but I've got multiple disabilities, but it's not relevant when you're talking about something like, when you're talking about me in everyday life. Like, if I'm talking about how if for instance I'm talking about how I struggle to get on a bus, it's not relevant that I've got a whole list of illnesses that I need to give you.
Yeah, exactly that. It's very interesting when, particularly around disability, is that people think you owe them an explanation of your disability. And now that could be how it impacts you, or what it is, or medically what it is. But actually, you don't owe anybody any explanation for anything. And like I said, saying I'm disabled is a full sentence. You don't need to delve any deeper into that.
But more often than not, it is that people just expect everything from you. They don't expect disabled people. It's always a sort of, disabled people are always supposed to be educating non-disabled people, but at the same time, I think more than anything, it comes down to people just being really nosy and thinking that they're entitled to know all of these things. So for instance, I've just moved into they're not sheltered housing, but they are bungalows that were specifically reserved for disabled and elderly people. The first thing people ask me is, because you've got to be either over 55 or disabled to get one of these houses. So the first thing, which is a bit of an insult, is, oh, are you over 55? I have had that so much. And then the next one is, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, well, nothing's wrong with me. I'm disabled, but nothing's wrong with me. I hate that. What's wrong with you? Because you get that so much.
It's that in itself is where society falls short, because they automatically think disability bad, therefore wrong, therefore something is not adding up. 2 and 2 doesn't make 4. And it's that reinforcement that we've had in society through media, through everything, through the way that we interact with disability.
It starts literally when babies are in the womb, that whole ideology of, I don't care what I have as long as it's healthy. That sort of stuff. It's like, I don't care what gender my baby is, as long as they're healthy. It's like, well, what if they're not healthy though? Are you going to change your mind about your baby when you discover that they're not healthy?
I've actually never thought of it like that before, but actually that it's such a solid point that's something that's always said.
I've stopped family members from saying that. I'm like, okay, but I'm not healthy. So, and it's statistically in this family, your baby might not be healthy. Because my family has got just pretty much everything that you can think of.
Yeah. But it's so true that actually it starts in the womb, and that question, what's wrong, I think it's so triggering on a lot of levels for a lot of disabled people, because consistently throughout their life they've been told that something isn't quite right or they don't fit in, and then having that reaffirmed and constantly re-asked is really really quite annoying.
Yeah, because it's quite often the first thing somebody says to you when they realize that you use like a mobility aid or something like that. Because I use different mobility aids depending on like how I'm feeling that day. So I will quite often, or often different times of the day, you know. So first thing in the morning I could be using a walking stick, later on in the day I could be using a walker, and then later on in the day I might not be using anything. And when people see me, like more often than not, they'll think I'm faking it, because I needed a walker like 2 hours ago, but now I'm walking fine. But when they do see me, if they haven't seen me in a while and I'm using like a walker or something like that, I'll be, what's wrong? What have you done? And I'm like, nothing. I'm just a bit tired right now. I want something I can sit down on while I'm walking my dog, you know?
Yeah,
I mean, more often than not, it's so I can carry me groceries.
I always come back to, like, whenever you're in Sainsbury's or Tesco's or wherever you shop for your food, it's when you are out and about, and I don't know why, but it's always when you're getting food that people stop and stare, or they ask questions, and it's like, why is it always in the supermarket aisle? Well, like, I'm just getting my bread. Why do you need to ask me that question?
For me, quite often, because I've got to go over a main road to get to my again, it's the Sainsbury's actually. To get to the Sainsbury's near me, I've got to go over a main road. And if I'm rushing to get over a main road, I'll often pick my walking stick up, or I'll like be pushing my walker at quite a fast speed. And so often people who are waiting for me to cross the road so they can go are like, oh, you don't really need that. You must be fine if you can do that. And I'm like, no. What the fuck? What has it got? Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, of course you are.
I was gonna say, what the fuck has it got to do with you? Like, literally, I was walking out. I was walking down to Sainsbury's the other week, and this man hung out of his van, going, "Oh, you don't really need that pet." And I was like, "How do you know you're not even like you don't know that I literally struggled to get out of the house for an hour earlier? Like, are you telling me I don't need this because I'm power?" And I was going downhill, to be fair, so it wasn't like I was struggling.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm pushing a walker really fast downhill because I'm going downhill right now.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because that goes back to that whole explanation. Like, people think they can tell you about yourself, particularly when you're disabled. People consistently tell you about what you can and can't do, and it's never actually about what you know you can and can't do. And I'm not saying can't as in like, don't put limits on yourselves, but sometimes there is a limit that we all have, and like, we don't need to cross it.
It's this thing of, so I often get asked, do I prescribe to the medical or social model? And I'm like, both, because you know, society does limit what I can and can't do, but also my body limits what I can and can't do. I've got physical disabilities that stop me from walking some days. Some days it is my body that stops me. So it's very much not a you can do what you put your mind to thing. It's a no, sometimes I can't, because my body literally hates me some days. Like, I'm in bed doing this right now, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So what was childhood like for you as a disabled woman?
It was all right, actually. I didn't become disabled. Okay, that's a lie. I wasn't diagnosed until I was about with the majority of the stuff that I live with until about. So I was diagnosed with celiac disease when I was 15. I didn't get things like lupus and all the rest of it until I was diagnosed with them until I was 16 to about 20. But I was diagnosed with dyspraxia when I was 9. And that was the main one, because it was something that was different. It meant that I couldn't do sports as well at school. It meant I couldn't write as well. It meant I was bullied because of that. But that was the only, like, it was literally just because I was different, you know, like I was an easier target to the kids, and the teachers didn't understand it and stuff as well. But for the most part, I had quite a nice childhood. Like I got really sick with lupus when I was 16, and I don't like the whole you've got to tell your sob story starting from childhood sort of thing. But
Yeah.
I didn't have a shit childhood, to be honest with you, and
Yeah.
most of it was just spent, like, looking back on it now, it's more of a, oh, I was a really neurodivergent kid, or oh, I was a really sickly Victorian child, and everybody just acted like I was a hypochondriac because I was a proper
Yeah.
sickly kid. So a lot of it now is looking back on my childhood, being like kids didn't just faint when they got in too much heat. Kids aren't supposed to just faint,
Yeah.
and that's me being a hypochondriac. And kids aren't supposed to just, like, and I'm gonna say it, kids aren't supposed to shit themselves all the time because they
Yeah.
because they eat foods that their body doesn't agree with it. And it's a doctor going, oh well, she's limiting her diet, she must have anorexia or bulimia, and I'm like, no, literally can't eat because I shit myself all the time.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of medical misogyny, especially because me and my mum both
Yeah.
got a lot of, she's just a hypochondriac, that's just pain girls are supposed to go through, maybe you're being too much of a neurotic mother. So, like, I feel like I've had the medical misogyny all my life, but for the most part, like, I didn't really realize it as a child. It was more
Yeah.
as I got older, and it was more as I accepted my disabilities that I look back on it now, and it was like doctors were awful to me and my mum when I was a kid.
I always find the relationship between doctors and disabled people, it's either one of two, and there's never really an in between. It's either your doctor has your back and champions you, or your doctor has not an effing notion of what they're doing. And
I do have doctors that do have my back. I've been with my lupus doctor for God, I've been with my lupus doctor for about 15 years now, and I know she'll always have my back and stuff. But there is a lot of doctors, especially when it comes to things that affect women more. So, like endometriosis, even things that, like, the way that different conditions, like the way neurodivergent conditions affect women, and the way women present, and mental health conditions in women. It's always when there's a female aspect to it that I've had a lot more misogyny and been treated a lot shitter compared to, like, the boys or men in my life.
And I think that's something that's particularly interesting with women, disabled women, or if you present as female, is that it really is that medical misogyny, isn't it, where you know that something isn't quite right. And I don't mean that, like, oh, something's wrong, something's right, but you know that there is something else going on, and having to fight for that consistently it takes so much effort, it takes so much time and effort, and it's understandable as to why so many women go undiagnosed with a whole varying different degree of things.
I mean, it's funny you say that, but I'm pretty convinced that I've got ADHD. Like, I've been peer reviewed by all of my friends. I've got, like, I've read the traits and I know all of these things. It just, when it clicked, it made sense. But I don't want to go through another diagnosis. I don't want to go through another round of doctors mistreating me and telling me that it's all in my head and that I don't know my own body and stuff like that, because I've had so much of it. I mean, like 15 years of trying to get endometriosis diagnosis and stuff like that, like, I just cannot be bothered with another one. Like, it's getting to that point as well where I procrastinate so much, and I struggle so much that I'm like, I could probably really benefit from ADHD medication, but I don't want to go through that diagnostic period.
And that's where the problem is that people are missing out on help because they don't want to go through what they've already been through, like yourself, or they just don't want to get laughed out of the door. And like that's becoming more and more apparent as we learn a lot more about women and neurodivergency, particularly like how ADHD and autism presents itself in women, because it's so different to how it presents itself in men. But
and
also
how we've got to act as women as well, though.
But also with, like, the rise of like TikTok diagnosis and stuff, people are also being told that they're just consuming it. It's something that they're just consuming,
so
which is problematic.
Like, I wouldn't know that I had ADHD if it wasn't for TikTok. Like, seeing all these videos of women who, especially women my age, because a lot of women in our 30s when everybody started talking about it on social media, I went, oh shit, that's me. I don't just not know what time is. I don't just procrastinate and put everything off. It's not just a funny, quirky thing that I can't do the dishes until 5 minutes before I'm supposed to have done them. Like,
Yeah.
you know, we all suddenly put it together because it was things that we've been told that, like, oh, it was just a lazy trait, or
Yeah.
like, you know, we've just been told that these are things that women shouldn't be for years and years and years. And then the younger generation started openly talking about it, which meant we could talk about it. And then all of a sudden you've got, oh, TikTok's responsible for thousands more diagnoses, thousands more women. And it's like, no, we've always been here. We just didn't realize that we had a name for it before.
Yeah.
Like it's through watching things like A Kind of Spark that I realized I didn't just sit like a bisexual. Because we always, you know, there's that silly memes if bisexuals can't sit in chairs and stuff. It's like, no, I sit like this because I'm neurodivergent.
Yeah. It's so fascinating, and you're right, like it's because of younger generations being like open about what they go through and who they are, and also that's to do with like the rise of social media, because we have a lot more space to give other people voices that you can actually relate to people.
And they've grown up with that as well, so they feel a lot more confident. They feel a lot less like they're going to get the piss taken out of them when they open up about these things. Like, the younger generation are bloody incredible with the things they will openly talk about, compared to what people in their 30s are so still like told that those are bad things that we shouldn't be talking about, you know, like sexuality, gender, and all this stuff. And I'm just like, I'm still like, oh no, I don't want to get trolled by thousands of people when I talk about these things, you know, because that's what it was like for us. And it's still, you know, it still happens, of course it still happens, but they don't give a fuck. They're like, yeah, this is my truth and I'm gonna live in it. And I mean, I'm growing to learn to do that a lot more, but I wish that I had the confidence of the younger generation, because they're making such big waves in ways that we have been ground down over, you know. And like it is in huge part to the media, because you get all of these amazing people who are talking about the diagnosis, and suddenly it's everyone's faking ADHD now because such and such has got ADHD, or everybody wants to be a sad girl on the internet for attention or clout, or everybody's faking being disabled for disability benefits. I mean, and that one's been around for a lot, but it's come back.
Yeah.
Much more recently, it's come back in the last couple of years. You know, the scrounger disability now, the scrounger for disability benefits narrative have come back in a huge way. It has.
Yeah. This is actually so perfect, because this is a perfect segue onto how disability has impacted your career, and particularly what you talk about and what you do. How is that, and having these conversations and having a bit of a presence, how is that navigated, how and what work that you do?
So when I started out writing, I was still scared of disability. I didn't really talk about disability, but then I realized that there needed to be a space, and there needed to be, when I started talking about it, I got such a big reception that I realized there's not enough people are talking about it, and not enough people are writing about it. And I just started talking about it and writing about it more until I was getting asked to write about these things. And like, you know, I grew up in, like, my first time voting was in 2010, so I got royally fucked over by the Lib Dems, who promised us this huge, amazing, different thing that was going to be different from the Tories before they teamed up with the Tories. So growing up as, you know, I was 20, growing up as a young adult into a proper full adult in a full Tory government has weaponized me no end. And it means that the things I'm writing about are the things that I've always written about, things that were relevant to my life, and these things became more and more relevant to my life. And things like, you know, like I've been really lucky to have a platform that I've built, and I think if I'm not talking about these things that are important, who is talking about these things?
Right.
And if it's not going to be like, these things are going to be written about, but they're not going to be written about from the perspective of a disabled person who's from somewhere that has been massively impacted by Tory cuts, who's lived in poverty and lived in all right circumstances, who is going to be impacted by things like the way the cost of living crisis, the benefits assessments being reformed, all the different things that the Tories are doing, who hugely was one of like, and I feel like it was so important to me to write through COVID as well, because like I was one of the few disabled writers writing throughout journalists writing throughout COVID, because there just wasn't the platform for us, and we were being told that our stories weren't relevant at times when like 6 in 10 of us were disabled people that were dying, and we were being told, oh yeah, we've covered disabled issues, and it's like, but you haven't, you know, like we're all dying.
What's something that really stings, and it makes me incredibly angry, is that if you were a disabled adult or child and you had a disability, particularly learning disability, it was more centered around learning disability, and you were hospitalized in COVID, you had an involuntary DNR put on your form.
Yeah.
How is that legal?
Yeah,
how?
Exactly. Like and you were being encouraged as well. People were being texted and called up and asked if we wanted DNRs on our medical records, because I was asked if I wanted a DNR on my medical record before like, I mean, I'd already had COVID at that point because I got COVID right at the beginning, but like I was being asked in like April and May, and I was like, if I get this again and I get sent into hospital, there's a high chance that I will be left to die, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's terrifying, because it was really quite horrific, because learning disabled people and people with things like Down syndrome, they weren't vulnerable. They weren't in the clinically vulnerable group because they were more susceptible to it. They were put in the clinically vulnerable group because they needed the care. They needed the extra care. They weren't less immune to it. They weren't more likely to catch it. Yet there was such a huge amount of people, learning disabled people, that died from COVID because they were just left, because they weren't given the care. They were left in care homes, or they were left in hospitals, and it's absolutely awful, honestly. Like the amount that this government just let disabled people die because they didn't care about us is like, I'm like, you can probably hear I'm getting quite choked up, because I get choked up every time I think about it. And it was one of those things where I was one of the few disabled people covering it, and it was my job, but it was also my community that I was watching being decimated. And it's like, how am I supposed to just get to 5 o'clock and switch that off when I'm literally getting texts from friends going, my granddad's in hospital and they've put a DNR on him and we can't get it taken off. Like family members weren't being allowed to take the DNRs off. Like, you know, like and it was things like I literally drove myself to a breakdown on Christmas 2000, just around Christmas 2021. I was working at Very Well Health, and I just submitted something about us having the highest daily figures, and then the new highest daily figures dropped, and I was in the middle of crying over how horrific it was, because it was around the time that like there was a new lockdown coming in, or families, Christmas 2021, families were allowed to mingle, but obviously I wasn't going to see my family, and I was feeling awful about that. So I was writing stuff about that, and then at the same time I was writing about the government just leaving us to die over Christmas, and this was when they were having all their parties and stuff, obviously. This was when stuff was first starting to come out about the parties, because it was 2021. And literally I had to stop myself from crying, log back in to the work system and put in the new highest daily figures, and then I just had to carry on with my day and go shopping before the article went out. And I was like, this isn't something that's normal. This isn't something that other reporters who aren't disabled are having to go through right now, who are reporting on this mass murder of disabled people. And then you get the people who allowed it to happen, like bloody Matt Hancock getting to go on the jungle and stuff.
Oh my god. I think that was the most ridiculous thing that I've ever witnessed in the entirety of British media in my entire life.
That was the maddest I have ever been. Like I've been mad a lot during lockdown, and I was mad a lot during lockdown. But when Matt Hancock, because it was the week that the COVID inquiry started, when he went on TV and started crying about lockdown and stuff, I'm like, are you fucking serious? Hundreds of thousands of my people died, and you are just like sobbing. You were sobbing because you had an affair, mate. Seriously.
And also, it was such a terrible video of him cheating on his wife. Like, it's a very embarrassing video. I would be absolutely mortified if that's how someone grabbed my butt. I would be.
Oh
I'd
my
be
God, it was so
absolutely
embarrassing for him.
mortified.
You know what? One of my favorite things ever is though. There's a picture of when he was kicked out of the house, out of his house by his wife, and she wouldn't let him go in the house, so she's handing him his stuff. And his dachshund dog is stood on the curb, like being the most judgmental dachshund ever. Like, I've got a dachshund, so I know how judgmental these dogs are. But this dog was just like, yeah, pick it up.
Something that I would love to talk to you about, because you write and because you work in that sphere, is, now I need to get this right. I want to be like the IPOC ?
IPSO.
Yeah. What is the deal with not having legislation around how we write about disability in the media?
Strap in. So IPSO was created after the Leveson inquiry, but it was supposed to be independent from most major publications, except most people who sit on the boards and most people who feed into IPSO are the people who write for the publications and who are editors and stuff like that. IPSO created the editors code that editors have to stick by, and they can be fined if they break that code. Most things in IPSO fall under discrimination clause. Most forms of discrimination fall under clause 12, which is the discrimination clause. And there is separate guidelines for every single other type of discrimination. So gender, sexuality, religion, different races, how you speak about different races, they've all got guidelines. Disability has apparently never needed one because they don't get complaints, is what I was told by the head of standards and practice at IPSO. So I sat down fully expecting, because I asked for a meeting about guidelines, so I fully expect them to want to work with me for guidelines. And it was just the worst meeting of my life. I was told people don't complain. I was told we only create guidelines after there's been a big event. So once there's complaints and stuff, literally whilst I was talking to her, two newspapers that are regulated by IPSO, they published really horrible stories about disability. It was stuff about ADHD and benefit scroungers and stuff like that. So I went, okay, you've got no complaints. I'll give you some complaints. We got 700 complaints over those two articles. And then they went, oh, we didn't actually think you'd give us complaints. You must have misunderstood me. I didn't say that you should give me complaints. I just said we don't have complaints. So I was like, but I gave you them. And then it was the best part. The discrimination clause only applies to individuals. It doesn't apply to groups of people. It only applies to individuals. So basically, I mean, even though we've still got all of these guidelines around race and sexuality and gender, the reason that people can be so awful about sexuality and trans people and all of this and disabled people is because it only applies to one singular person if they're being awful about one singular person, such as the way Clarkson was eventually fined and had to take down his stuff about Meghan Markle. That applies because it was one person. So I went, okay, we're going to keep going. In the meantime, we were told there's going to be a consultation. So any suggestions any suggestions you have for the way that we should be looking at complaints can be submitted that way. I got over 1,000 people to submit to the consultation saying we should change the clause to include groups of people. Heard nothing from that because we don't know when they're next going to sit, and they wouldn't tell us when they were next going to sit. In the meantime, The Sun, which is regulated by IPSO, called Sophie Morgan a wheelchair. They literally called her a wheelchair, and they led with this. This was when Strictly were rumored to have a wheelchair using contestant. So they went with cha-cha chair and first wheelchair contestant. So we went, okay, here's an individual. Here are 700 complaints. No, I think we got 900 complaints. Here are 900 complaints about an individual. And they went, oh, it doesn't matter because Sophie, it doesn't count because Sophie didn't complain. Sophie did complain. They didn't respond to Sophie. So we were again told that didn't count. So I literally had to just go, no, I'm done here. I'm fucking done here. And in the meantime, the scrounger narrative and all of that just kept coming up.
Yeah.
And I kept telling people to complain. So, and then a really awful one happened in, I want to say it was Times or Telegraph. I can't remember which one. It was a couple of weeks ago. So I went, okay, this is really inaccurate actually, because they conflated means tested benefits and non-means tested benefits, and on non-means tested benefits you can still work. So I was like, actually there's a lot of inaccuracies here. So I told people to complain for inaccuracy, and we got about 500 complaints for inaccuracy, and then went, yeah, okay, this might be inaccurate, but it's an opinion piece and it's what that person thinks is true. Yeah. Yeah. So IPSO basically says you can write whatever the fuck you want about disabled people as long as you believe it's true. And I'm still fighting them.
Which is just inherently problematic.
Yeah, so it basically just allows any columnist they want to write whatever the fuck they want about disabled people, neurodivergent people, benefits, like, as long as they believe that it's true, because it's their opinion.
Yeah. This is why disabled people and the media have a very fraught relationship.
Absolutely mind-blowing. And even when papers try their best, you know, there are still instances of them accidentally doing things, like, because there's just not the education there. You know, there's things like a lot of especially non-disabled writers don't know that you can't use things like wheelchair bound.
That's what I was just about to say. That's something that gets brought up quite a lot.
Yeah. They don't know that people prefer disabled person to person with a disability. They don't always know the history of trauma porn and inspo porn, and that these stories do a lot of damage to us when you're painting this person as such an inspiration and then having splashed across the next few pages about benefits cuts and all of that stuff, you know. But it's not there stopping them. There's not a straight set of guidelines that say this is what is okay, this is what's acceptable. And if we had that, it would revolutionize media, you know, like, and it would inform a lot of people who are trying their best, because there are a lot of good people in media, you know. There are good people across all papers, even shit papers. There are good people in them, but they don't know any better, because there's not enough disabled people in media. There's not enough disabled people in power in media, and there's no guidelines that are telling them this is how you should be writing about it.
I just think it's mind-blowing. I think it's so mind-blowing that there aren't any guidelines, because I think the way that we have relationships with disability, now being disabled and your own relationship with your disability is completely individual. However, it is very much impacted by what you see, what you read, and what you hear, regardless of who you are. And then that gets more impacted when you acquire your disability, because the only time, the likeliness is, if you acquire your disability in life, the likeliness is your only interaction with disability has probably been through the media, which tends to be one of two things. It tends to be, what a hero, he's amazing, or you're destitute and you're down and out.
Yeah.
Or you've overcome your disability, you've magically overcome it, or you've died. And there's no in between for any of them. There's none.
Whenever I talk about benefits, I get a lot of people who are newly disabled who go, I did used to believe in the benefits scrounger narrative until I realized how hard it was. Because that's all people read, you know, when people constantly read about billions being defrauded and how easy it is and how much of a cushy life you've got because you don't have to work, of course they're going to believe that. And then it suddenly happens to them and they go, oh shit, this isn't the cushy life that I thought it would be, you know.
I don't know how to express how important it is that narrative needs to change, because so many people do not apply for the help that they need because of that narrative, because they believe they fall under that scrounger, or they believe that they're not worthy of getting something, or alternatively they don't even know that they can get help.
And so many people don't want to identify as disabled. Like, you're seeing a lot come through with COVID a lot of long COVID, people who have long COVID don't want to identify as disabled because they're like, oh no, I'm not like them. This has happened to me, and you see a lot of long COVID people, like, I'm not being funny, acting like this is a completely new scenario. Like, oh my God, the government are doing nothing. I can't get benefits. I'm being kept out of work. And it's like, welcome to life as a disabled person. And it's because there's never been, for a long time, there's never been such a mass disabling event of people who were relatively healthy beforehand. And now they think this is such a unique scenario when this is what happens to acquired disability and to people who've lived as disabled for a long time. It's just now it's suddenly happening to the general population.
Yeah. I really like what you've just said about that, how there hasn't been a mass disabling event quite like COVID before that we've ever lived through. And actually it rings true, because what you say about, when you acquire your disability, like nobody gives you a handbook, and nobody says like, welcome to the club. You literally just get like a rubber stamp on your medical book that's like, yeah, you're now disabled, go and deal with life yourself. And if there was, a handbook, I'm not necessarily sure how helpful it would be, but at least you would know what direction to be looking in for the help. And it doesn't exist. And that also, again, plays into that idea that the media do need to have guidelines, because then your next port of call is the media, because that's how we get our news, that's how we get our information. And if we don't have the guidelines there, how are we meant to move forward as a society with people who do acquire their disability? How does that happen?
It's just the constant narrative that we are the worst possible scenario, or we are so inspirational and we're overcoming disabilities, like I've got it as a rule that I won't work with anybody whose PR describes them as doing everything despite their disability, because I'm like, no, I'm doing everything with my disability. It's just, it's this narrative that I think there's a lot of internalized ableism, especially in acquired disabilities. But that's because disability is seen as the worst possible thing by so many people, and it's portrayed as the worst possible thing, when really we're just people living our lives. And that's been a big important part of not just the work that I do, but the work that I showcase. So in things like the Unwritten and in things like Disabled Britain, I never wanted it to be, this is disability specific, this is condition specific. It's just, this is us living our lives, and this is the way we're trying to live our lives. And this is, like, we had a lot about sex on the Unwritten, because that's hardly ever spoken about. Like, disability,
it's a big taboo.
Disability
big
sex,
taboo.
like people just expecting that we don't do it. And just things like trying to get into work, trying to go to the supermarket, trying to, like we were saying, like not being stopped in the supermarket and being a teachable moment every time we're just trying to do a shopping.
It's so true. It's so true.
It's just trying to show all sides of the reality of disability without it being dressed up for the non-disabled audience. That's what I try and do the most.
And I think that's really important, is that sometimes not all writing, and particularly like sometimes this podcast, it is not designed for the non-disabled. It's designed for the disabled to feel like they have a space, they have their own, they can listen into a conversation, they can read, and they can relate. Whereas, when you think about it, 9 times out of 10, yourself and myself, we are fitting into the non-disabled world, which isn't actually our reality. Like, I consistently forget that everybody's reality is not disability. And it's almost like a stark reminder. I'm like, oh shit, like you don't understand that because you're not disabled. Whereas like I wake up in the morning and I'm like, okay, this is a disabled life. Like, here we are. Like, it's all good. I'm happy, like whatever. But then I go outside and I'm like, oh, you don't understand that because you're not disabled and you can't see the inherent problem with what you just said or what you're doing. And I forget that all the time.
I mean, there's so much ableism that people just ignore because it's not part of their lives, like it's just like things like language, things like the way they act and stuff, the things they make fun of people for is like, but do you not realize that there's a reason that these people are doing these things, and it's not just because they're a little weird. Like, it's just,
Sometimes we are weird. I will give us that.
sometimes it's because I'm a little weird. But yeah, like it's just so much of what we do is supposed to fit into non-disabled life, that disabled narratives are missing so much. And that's why when it comes to telling our stories, more often than not, disabled people think that they can tell them. Like, I can always tell 9 times out of 10 when a non-disabled person has written a story about
Oh,
disability.
easily. So
You
it's
can
so
just tell
easy.
straight away you can tell, and it's like, why did you not get a disabled, like, and more often than not, they'll have a disabled commentator who wasn't paid. Like, they'll have somebody who's given a comment about why it's important to their life or whatever. But it's like, why did you not just ask that person to write the story? And more often than not, it'll be, oh, we didn't have the budget for freelancers. Oh, we didn't. And it's like, okay, but why didn't you have a disabled person on your staff? Why don't you have disabled writers? And then it'll be, oh, that's not possible because they can't work from offices. And it's like, yeah, but I don't work from an office, like, I was only able, like, I've been doing my job since I've been a disabled writer and going into journalism since 2015. But it's only because of COVID that I was able to become a freelancer, that I was able to become self-employed full time.
Yeah.
Like, and that was because all of the things that I've been saying for years, like, I can do this from home, I can do this from my bed, I don't need to be working 8 hours a day, became possible for everybody else. Everybody else started working from home, and that's what was so infuriating for disabled people, because it's like, oh, working from home is great, it opens it up to everybody. And it's like, yeah, but we've been asking for that for the last 10 years. Years and years and years. Since the internet happened, we've been asking to work from home. And it's always been possible. They just didn't want to make it possible because it was seen as a benefit, and it was seen as an advantage for disabled people, and disabled people having better. We can't have people thinking that somebody else that disabled people have got it better. And it's like, it's not better though, it's just equal. When we haven't got anything more than what you've got, we're just doing things in the way that makes it equal for us, able to do our jobs in the same way you are.
I love what you just said about it's not better, it's equal, because I think a lot of people forget that. A lot of people don't realize the inequality and disability, and actually, making accommodations for disability it's not about being better, it's about being equal.
And I think this is another language problem, because in our country we call it benefits, whereas in America it's called welfare. So if we called it welfare instead of benefits, it would stop being seen as it's a benefit, it's a bonus. It's something that people are getting for doing nothing.
Actually, I think it's a really interesting point, isn't it? That maybe the way that we speak about, benefits, as in like the monetary benefit, it should actually change, because it's a misconception that it's a benefit. It's actually just leveling someone's playing field when they actually need more support than someone else.
That's it, like, it's literally just, and I mean, I forget, and I think because all benefits quite often get conflated together, people forget that on some benefits you can work, you can have a job, and it's not like you're not defrauding the system because you're working, because PIP is there to help people for the cost of their lives, that the extra costs that non-disabled people don't face. I mean, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's because on the standard rate of PIP, which is what I get, you get about 500 a month, and it's been estimated that disabled people face costs of extra costs of over 1,000. So it's not enough, but it's something, and it levels it that a little bit. It makes it that little bit more leveler for us. But people are like, oh no, they don't deserve it, and it's like, why not? I mean, I spent the last 2 weeks being told that I don't have a job while I have a job, because I stood up for benefits on TV. Literally, people telling me to get a job and that I shouldn't be spending so much money getting my nails done, because I stood up for disability benefits on TV. I'm like, I've got a job. This was me doing my job.
So I wonder if you have a piece of advice for a younger version of yourself knowing what you know now?
God. Stop being worried what people think about you. Like, most of the time people are not thinking about you.
Yeah, it's an important one.
People are very self-centered, and most of the time they're more worried about themselves than everybody else. Stop listening to what people on the internet say about you when they've got 24 followers and you've got 10,000. Don't be afraid to pitch the stories that are important to you. Try, I spent a lot of time worrying that I was going to make myself undesirable by pitching the really hard stories. And then they turned out to be the most successful stories because they're the stories that needed telling the most.
Yeah.
And I think this is the big one. Don't feel like you owe anybody the intimate details of your diagnosis or your struggles with disability, because when I first started out, I did that a lot. Like, I told a lot of publications the really intimate details and how it affected me mentally and physically and how it affected my relationships. But I wouldn't talk about now if I talked about those things. And there's a lot of things I talked about in the younger days because I thought I was helping the narrative when I was actually really feeding into the trauma narrative.
Yeah. So much advice. And I love that though. I love that though, because I love what you said about don't be afraid to pitch the hard stories because they're the ones that need to be told. And I think for so long, disability has always, like we've already said today, disability is either this massive inspiration or it's you're down and out and you're desolate and there's no in between. But actually there are so many important stories that lie in the in between that need to be told, that need to be heard. And I always think, particularly from doing this podcast and chatting with people, what about the person who needs to hear this story because they can't find it anywhere else? Yeah. What about that person? Where will they go? And if I don't tell it or you don't tell it, the person that's going to tell it is not going to be disabled, and they're not going to get a true representation of life, of how it is, of the reality of this. And I love that so much, because there's always growth in hardship, and it's not always nice. No, that's the thing. Like, it's not nice.
It's not necessary, but growth doesn't always have to be good, you know?
Yeah.
If you come out with something and you're so much harder, or it's not even harder, if you're just a better person and you've learned from these things and it's changed you in a way that it wouldn't have changed you before, like, it's been worth it, you know? Like, life's not about hitting the great things all the time. And I think the stories that have really resonated with me have been and the comments that always make me cry has been when someone has gone, this is what I needed, this is what I needed, this is what I wish I could have told my younger self. I have never read my story like this before. I never thought that other people experienced these things the same way that I did. And I cry every time. Like, thank you for telling this story. Like, I've never seen this story told before. And it's things like people saying, like, I don't feel so alone anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm like, God, that's so powerful. So powerful, because we are. Disability is such an isolating thing. Like, you think, like, oh, there's nobody else who's going through this horrible thing like me, especially when you're surrounded a lot by non-disabled people. I mean, that was me very much at the beginning of my journey. Now I've barely got any non-disabled friends because all of us are disabled or neurodivergent in some way. And that's beautiful, because the internet has brought together such a community of disabled people. Like, it's people I would never have met before. Like, if I was just living my life and living in my little town and stuff, you know, like, the online disability community has saved my life, and I think it's saved a lot of people's lives in so many different ways.
God, this actually said, oh my God, you would think that I planned this. Oh, so good. So I like to ask everybody about a positive trait that they've noticed within themselves through hardship. And as we were just talking about hardship and growth, I wondered if through any periods of growth in your life, you look back upon reflection, you think, actually, I handled that really well, or that trait came out of that, and I'm actually very proud of it. Do you have anything? Does anything come to mind?
I'm really resilient.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ridiculously resilient, like, but also I'm really fucking funny. Like the jokes that I make, the things that I make jokes about that I shouldn't make jokes about. Like I can always
Yeah.
see the funny side in things, and it's like one of my friends years ago, the writer Fiona Longmore, had an article. And she had a saying that was, "This too shall be funny," and I always try and think of that like, this is awful right now, but someday I'm gonna find these things absolutely ridiculous and absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
So the things that I make jokes about, and the things that I don't necessarily make light of them, but getting through these things with grace and being able to be petty in my own way, but make always trying to make a difference out of, whilst terrible humor is
Yeah.
like my ability to always have terrible humor about things.
But I do think, like, and I've said this before, is that if you're part of the disabled community, whether or not you were funny before, if you acquired your
Oh,
disability,
we're
you
fucking
probably will
hilarious.
become funny. Like you will develop a dark sense of humor. Like
I'm
that's just
I
factual.
the dark group chats that I'm in are just absolutely incredible. Like we will take some of the worst scenarios of our life and just make silly little memes about it, or silly little like jokes about and stuff, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Like I was talking about today, like today is the anniversary that 14 years ago today I tried to end my life. I tried to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And straight away one of my friends was like, "Okay, it's Rachel celebration day," because he was still alive. And I was like, "Okay, cool." And then another of my friends went, "I'm going to celebrate Rachel today by bullying a Tory on the internet." I was like, that is exactly how I want people to celebrate me.
Yeah. Well, also thank you for sharing that, because that's not always the
Oh, I
easiest
know.
thing to share. And there's a lot to be said in dark humor,
Hmm.
particular with trauma. And
Hmm.
disabled people just tend to have a little bit more trauma than most people. Like
I
that's a
think the,
fact.
I think the thing is, we're so expected to mine our trauma as well, and we're so
Yeah.
expected to talk about the hardest parts of our life. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like
just,
it's just
just,
dishing out the daily
just
news.
just give it away for free. It's like, no, if I'm gonna give it away, I'm gonna make it fucking funny.
And I'm also gonna get paid for
I'm also going
it.
to get paid for it. I'm not going to give it away, and I'm not going to give you my darkest trauma just because you think that people should read it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I really wish that I'd learned when I was younger that I have control over how I can tell my story.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. What I also love is the amount of bizarre questions disabled people get.
Oh my God.
So, like, I'll preface this with not religiously, that's not the word I was looking for. The word that I was looking for is gone. But I always get asked, did a shark bite your arm off? And that's like something that people love to ask me. And I always think that, like, we live in the UK. UK is an island, not surrounded by sharks. But if I had been, I probably would have been front page news, and you probably would have seen my face before. But considering that that's never happened, that story doesn't exist because it didn't happen. Now, I was wondering, what are some particular weird questions you get around your own disabilities?
The stupid thing, like, so lupus is I get asked if I'm a vampire because you can't go out in sunlight if you've got lupus. There was a large spate of there was a large time that I was asked if I was a vampire, especially around because my illness happened around twilight, so that was so that was great.
You
Are
are
you
Edward
a
Cullen.
vampire? Are you a vampire? Because that happened around that time. The stupid things like, "Oh, have you got a license for that?" When I've got me walker, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"No, obviously not. It's a walker. It doesn't need a license."
Yeah.
Things like being asked, because I've got a collection of really nice walking sticks. Like they're not the boring, horrible grey stuff. So I get asked if
Uh-huh.
it's a proper lot. Asked if I really need that, or if it's a fashion accessory. Is that real, or is that a fashion thing, love? And I'm like, no, it's not a fashion thing. I mean, it is a fashion thing, but it's also real at the same time. It's both.
Yeah.
I get asked, oh, the most ridiculous was when I was trying to get a hysterectomy, and the doctor said, "You know that's not reversible, right?"
God.
that's not reversible. If I decided that I wanted kids, that's not reversible. But also just things like also is that what when I ask people when I tell people that I can't really go out in the sun and stuff, it's also, is that why you're ginger? I'm like, no,
because the two go hand in hand.
because I'm pale and I'm ginger, but that's not the same thing. Just loads and loads of stupid stuff. I think I get it a lot less now because people know that I'm a sarcastic dickhead, so
Yeah.
I will not give them a straight answer. But yeah, it's very often, do you really need that? Oh, do you need that, or is it for your shopping? Is one that I get a lot with my walking. I'm like, both.
It's a mixture of the two. It's functional and practical.
Both. When I'm wearing sunglasses and I'm walking my dog whilst I've got my cane. My cane does not look like a cane that a blind person uses. It's bright blue and it's got a question mark handle. But when I'm wearing sunglasses and I'm walking my very small dachshund, I get asked if he's my guide dog.
Because that's the guide dog you want.
Because a little dickhead is the type of guide dog you want.
Truly, the disabled experience is like no other.
Yeah, there's literally no other. Like, I obviously the other minorities get a lot of shit, but the things disabled people just get assumed about her is absolutely bizarre. It really is.
I literally have one final question for you today. But I've loved this conversation. I think it's been fascinating to talk about the media and ableism and how do we pull that apart in a way that benefits us as in disabled people, and how do we work with that? But my final question for you is, are you disabled and proud?
Of course I am. I bloody love being disabled. I wouldn't change my life for a thing, apart from the ableism.
Yeah, minus the ableism and my grand.
Minus the ableism and my body sometimes deciding that I just can't walk some days. Fantastic. I bloody love my disabled life. I really do.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for coming on today. I have loved this conversation. It's been a real deep dive into the media and how the media perceives disability. And I've loved it because I think a lot of people need to hear this kind of conversation that's very like off the bat and actually very truthful. And I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it. It's been great. I've loved it.
Oh, thank you so much for having us on. It's been so fun.